Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another big interview. It's August's big interview session, and we've got something a bit different for you today, right? So we've had a lot of licensing experts, ITAM gurus, and stuff like that on in the past, but today we have someone who technically doesn't really have a lot to do with ITAM. It's fair to say, Yost.
Well, I mean, I think in IT everybody has to do something with item in the end.
Oh, he's learnt so well. He's learnt so well. All right, go on, Yosty boy. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, hello everyone. My name is Joost. I'm working as an endpoint engineering for especially focused on the macOS parts of everything, especially Apple. Mainly focused on macOS, but also iOS, of course.
That is why we've got you on, and the main topic for today, because as I've learned over the years, you do require different elements of management and IT asset management when it comes to Apple and Mac devices, right? And I think that a really good place to start is how on earth did you get into being a specialist just for Macs and Apple stuff?
To be very honest, it was never my ambition to be focused on Apple. I kind of rolled into it, so I got an opportunity in the company where I worked for. Someone in the engineering space was really grabbing me and like telling me, explaining a lot of stuff. You know the guy actually, and he was really helpful. So he got my interest, and then because he was helping me a lot, it interested me as well because I could saw grow opportunities. And that's just how I rolled in.
Out of interest, did you like personally? Were you an Apple fan before you became an Apple specialist?
Mobile phones, yes, from a personal use perspective. From an personal perspective, I was not really. I've never been really a gamer or something like that. So not really the typical IT guy who was like playing around with computers only. So yeah, play around with Windows, Apple. Just not never really had a full focus choice preference.
So you weren't an Apple fanboy before you went down this career path. What struck you immediately? Because like just generally from my perspective, right? We're filming this. I'm on my Mac right now, and when I first got this, it feels so different to Windows because I've grown up using Windows, right? I know where buttons are.
Yeah.
I know where shortcuts are. For you, when you entered into the Apple world, like what was the biggest like? Whoa, okay, that's very different.
I think from an Apple perspective, I think that what you have to adapt when you're working with Apple is that Apple is very strict on everything. So once Apple decides we go that direction, there is no left, no right, no it's that. And even if it doesn't work for everyone, that's the way to go. You have to get used to it. But on the other end, the benefits of that is that Apple has a very stable platform.
It's strict, but they're strict for a reason, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, you can say it like that. It's Apple.
It's Apple. So yeah, what kind of? I mean, let's be honest. You do know Windows as well, right? So personally, from well, we were last personal and corporate, right? Because I think that they do kind of overlap a bit. Your person, like you mentioned, there, you're a fan of the phones. I mean, I have apart from this, I have no Apple products, right? You've got the pods, Now you're fully ingrained in that ecosystem. I think that's
And the
what Apple
watch.
does. The watch as well. That's what Apple seems to do really well. Is when you buy one Apple device, it's so easy to then build out and get really caught into that ecosystem. Do you think that that's in a corporate world? Do you like that kind of strictness and that kind of Apple is locked down. It has what it works with really well, and what it doesn't work with, it really doesn't work with. Would you rather a bit more
Yeah.
flexibility?
Well, to be honest, yeah, to be very honest, I think Apple, like in the enterprise, is kind of like increasing a lot. So I think very like a couple of years ago, Apple was fully focusing on the private market.
Right.
What I see also functionality wise, for example, AirDrop, AirPlay, that kind of stuff is more used in the private sector. I would say because of all the corporate networks, etc. AirDrop, of course, that kind of connections do not really work on the enterprise level. But especially the last couple of years, Apple is really adapting to the enterprise market, and they're making huge improvements. From an engineering perspective, it's great to have one vendor for everything: hardware, software, everything. They just manage everything, which is like from an engineering perspective, like a dream.
What isn't a dream from an ITAM perspective, which you get very excited for, are the amount of new releases that Apple bring out compared to like the Windows one, like all of their Apple events, right? New models, new chipsets, new, and you're always straight away, right, we need to test one. We need a tester, we need a tester, we need a tester. Like, come
Well,
on. That is a bit annoying.
I'm not sure, David, because if you compare the Apple stuff with the Windows stuff, for example, Apple doesn't do drivers. So everything is built in because, of course, that's their own system, so
Right.
they can do everything in-house. Testing wise, we don't necessarily have to test everything because if it's an M3, M4, that doesn't really matter from an engineering perspective. Though the biggest testing phase was from when we moved from the Intel to the Apple Silicon processors. That was the
Right.
only time we really had to test the stuff in the on the Apple hardware for the Apple hardware related stuff. Other than that, it's just the OS which is upgrading every year, where we have to adapt a bit. But
Yeah, how
from a
much
hardware perspective.
the OS does upgrade a lot, right? And even the new models and the new chipsets. How does that impact you as as an engineer and as a Mac specialist? Because do you just have to are the changes significant enough where you're like, oh, okay, that's a bit different,
I mean, it depends which operating system you're referring to. I mean, from Mojave to Catalina was a big change. From at the top of my head, to Big Sur was a big change as well with the system extensions which came into play, moving away from the kernel extensions in the older OSs. So that there are like some OS versions which require a little bit more adoption of the environment. But for example, this year macOS Sequoia was pretty relative easy OS upgrade, I would say. Minor changes from an engineering perspective. So yeah,
from a
yeah,
user
depends which.
perspective?
Yeah, I think this year was okay. I don't think they made huge changes on the user level of things and engineering level.
I think that is. I mean, I'm not an Apple fanboy by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that is where, like, for example, like you do upgrades to like Windows 11, and that is like, oh, that search bar's moved, that app looks different, that's moved. You have to provide like a level of hypercare. There's way more training around it. There's guiding the users through the change. Oh no, you used to
Yeah.
click here, but now you click over here. I think with Apple, I think that you don't have to do as much hypercare, right?
I mean, I think Apple's making the same changes. The only thing is that I think the difference between Windows and Apple is that Apple's making the changes every year, small adjustments.
Right.
So, I mean, if you compare probably the macOS version 5 years ago with now, like I'm not even sure what the difference of years is between Windows 10 and 11. But if you look up the same number years of difference between the macOS and the from that year until now, there are the same amount of changes, but just because if you change it every year, the user might see it less, and or the
Right.
adoption is less.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because there's such a bigger gap between the Windows updates compared to the Mac OS one. Right. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there is quite a
So
long time span between them, especially back in the day when you went from XP to Windows 7 and stuff like that. Then it was like, that is night and day. But because Apple are doing it more frequently with smaller updates. No,
yeah,
you're not going
as
to
a
convince
user,
me I'm an Apple guy. No, that makes a lot of sense. But no, you're not. I'm not going down that route because I don't know. I don't really know why I refuse to go down that route because I really do like the MacBook Air, but I just don't want to get grabbed into that ecosystem, right? And I think a lot of organizations, if you are Mac heavy, it's so easy then to be providing iPhones for the end users. It's so easy then to be providing iPads for the end user. And then it's like you're locked into that ecosystem already. And actually, this Android device over here might be more cost effective. But
yeah. But from an engineering perspective, it's way easier to manage the iOS devices than it's to do Android. Because an Android is much more open because Apple is restricting a lot of stuff. So from an engineering perspective and a company wise, it's easier to adapt to Apple. But I think once you adapt to Android, it might be an option as well.
see, it's easier to manage. Like from a security standpoint as well, right? Does that also mean then that Macs would be more secure out the box than Windows?
Nah, not necessarily. Depends how you manage it and to what extent.
Good. A point for Windows. But Mac has its own inbuilt security, doesn't it?
Yeah, Apple has its own gatekeeper, which you can lock, but that depends on how you set up that gatekeeper. Because, for example, it might be that your organization requires some different applications which are not allowed by Apple Gatekeeper by default. So you have to do some scripting to allow these, or you have to turn off Gatekeeper, which is not recommended by the way. So I would never do that. But there are a lot of possibilities around it. But yes, Apple has its own built-in security. Yeah.
And I do. I mean, I only found out that this was a fact recently. The fact that you can do like Find My Mac and stuff like that. I think from if you're seeing Kit go walkies, I like that. But I know that it's not enabled in a lot of organisations because of the little initials of GDPR. Uh,
Yeah, uh, yeah, and probably because of the Apple IDs are not managed by everyone because it brings a lot of limitations as well. And of course, the Find My options are owned by the Apple ID.
the I am a big fan of the finding my stuff. I do. I think from an ITAM perspective, if there was no GDPR issues and someone had walked away with it, it had been lost or stolen, to do that, it requires still an internet connection, though, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah, definitely.
That would be so useful if a user's reported in, left my MacBook on the train.
And it updates live where you are. That would be amazing. But I'm not sure if that will ever happen because of GDPR. I think technically it's possible. Technically, it's possible.
Maybe we need to like I don't know, do something against GDPR to say, look, ITAM is really important now. Okay, we need to be able to see where this stuff is. We need to enable this in a way that's an anonymous way almost, whereby we don't care about the Apple profile or whatever. So we just want to know where that physical kit is.
Yeah, yeah. That's always from an item perspective, yes. From a security point of view, of course, with ABM, etc., we have everything kind of locked down, so nobody can use it until we release it from Apple Business Manager. From a security perspective, Apple's doing a great job. For an item perspective, that doesn't help there
They
yet
could
much.
improve. Yeah, they could do better. Okay, right. We're starting an amnesty then. We want them to implement a feature whereby, in fact, Windows needs to do this as well, where you could find the device without any kind of GDPR breaches. You mentioned
Yeah.
something called ABM there, right? So that's another thing that's unique with Apple. You've got a unique set of tools that you as an engineer use to manage these devices, which Windows devices don't. What on earth is an ABM?
ABM is Apple Business Manager. So what you can do with that is when you order Apple stuff at an Apple authorized reseller, could be potentially a lot of vendors, you can allow the vendor to add devices directly into your Apple Business Manager, and that way you can manage the device with an automated device enrollment setup, for example. So you can imagine sending a MacBook from a vendor to the end user directly. The user opens it up, logs in, and it goes through the automated device enrollment process, all automated because of Apple Business Manager. So that isn't great automation.
And is it literally just a case of they just put a serial number in?
Yeah, they just put the serial number of the device because the Apple authorized reseller is the owner of that asset. They uploaded it to the company who had ordered that Apple device, iOS, macOS, whatever. They put it in the correct MDM server in the Apple Business Manager management server, and depends how it's configured on the company, but they can assign it to a different MDM servers, Intune, Jamf, whatever they like, Kanji, and it will automatically go to that automated device enrollment process.
You keep referring to authorized reseller.
Yes.
Does that mean if you went and brought it from, I don't know, like someone who didn't have the Apple authorized reseller stuff or a second hand, it wouldn't work?
It does, but there is manual interaction required. So you can always add an Apple device manually into Apple Business Manager, but then you're missing the source. So by who is it added, by which vendor, the procurement data is not an ABM, etc. So from an item point of view, only work with Apple authorized resellers.
Yeah, okay. And this ABM, Yost, this sounds great for extra ITAM data support.
There is, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, and especially this year, Apple released the new Apple API, the API functionality within Apple Business Manager, so you can even automate the extraction of data to, for example, an AMDB service in ServiceNow, for example.
That would be most helpful. Because forgive me if I'm wrong, but isn't there some level of procurement info in an AMDB as well?
Yes, so for example, the date when the device has been added to the Apple
Yeah,
Business Manager, by which vendor, and I think out of the top of my head, the serial number, so the serial number, of course, as well, the email number, I think, for the iOS
yeah.
devices. And I think the source number as well. So I think the order number from the vendor.
And because Apple are going more towards the enterprise, then they've brought an API out so you can integrate that into like an AMDB.
Yeah, You can bring it into whatever, but you can even automate that. For example, you can even automate the assignment of different MDM servers based on the button in SharePoint, whatever. Make it as crazy as you want, but you can automate ABM stuff without logging into it in ABM.
So why? I mean, obviously you don't work for Apple. You're just a massive Apple enthusiast and love Apple. But why do you think they have shifted a focus towards more corporate environments and enterprises now
Yeah.
from the end user?
Good question. Not 100% sure. What you can see from the last couple of years is that the Apple stake in enterprise is growing. You see also a lot of companies who are shifting completely to macOS. I'm not sure if
Wow.
that's a good idea, to be honest. From an engineering perspective, it makes it much easier because, of course, Microsoft, Apple, it's always a little bit like, yeah, some things might work better in Windows, some things
Yeah.
might work better directly with Apple. Um, but yeah, I think they see an opportunity there, and they're just extending the functionalities. They always have been a bit in the enterprise world, but the focus was always on the personal market. I have the feeling, might be wrong there, but yeah, that's always the feeling what I got. In the last couple of years, they're increasing functionalities on the enterprise level.
But as an engineer, that for you, that must be a bit exciting, right? That they are
Yeah,
focusing more on the enterprise side of things. What kind of extra things would
100%.
you like to see? Like, what's on your dream list that Apple would implement to help support you from an engineer and in an enterprise organization?
I think more control in Apple Business Manager would be already very helpful. For example, right now there's a big limitation on the Apple Business Manager side that as soon as you add a vendor to ABM, you can in no way you can remove the vendor anymore.
Oh,
Might be if you contact Apple. I'm not even sure if that's allowed, but from an ABM perspective as an admin, you can't. So that kind of stuff, like a little fine tuning in there as well, that would help.
interesting. Okay. In terms of app packaging, deployment, all of that fun stuff, are you happy with how that works? Anything on your wish list for that?
Good catch. For example, I'm working in a global company who is like deploying applications in Asia, America, Europe, etc. As you know, Apple's App Store is different in every region. An Apple Business Manager can only be in one region. So if you want to deploy Asian specific applications everywhere in the global company, you have to change your region of the Apple Business Manager.
Right.
So you might be ending up in a multiple ABM environment, which is not very useful because, of course, you can only verify one domain per Apple Business Manager per company, etc. So make it very complicated from a technical perspective. But yeah, that kind of things, Apple still has to fine tune a bit for the enterprise world, but they're catching up.
Okay. So we've got two things on your wish list. Go on. Anything else on your wish list that you'd hope they'd improve, even from like an OS upgrade process? Yeah, how you package and deploy apps, general management, that kind of thing. Maybe forcing users to upgrade their OS without them
That's
having
actually
to. Yeah.
It's actually a good catch because, for example, what happens right now when we order hardware, we only get the OS version, which when we ordered the MacBooks.
Yep.
So, for example, we have now already to think about what we're going to need in the next couple of months because in September, October, they will release the new macOS Tahoe 26. And all the orders we will make in that after that period, and maybe even the month before, I think, because I think we have that issue every year, that we need new MacBooks, but they're already with the new OS, and we're not ready in the testing yet. So it's always like a little bit of a gray period that we need to calculate in advance. Would be great if we could. I think that's a good thing from Apple as well. That every device gets a new
Yeah. It's a unique challenge though
OS.
for Apple. You don't get that with the Windows, right? Because typically organizations have like even the hardware vendor themselves from a Windows device, image it, tag it, send it out so it's with the image that you've predefined for that particular role or just a standard image. You don't have that for Mac. So yeah, that is a very unique. Oh wow, we were ordered some MacBooks. Oh, they've been shipped with an OS that we ain't ready for yet.
Yeah, but I think that's a good thing though, because Apple kind of enforces you to go to the latest version of OS, which
Yeah.
is good. The only problem is that all the old devices, which are still running on the old OS, for example, imagine that that a user returns his MacBook with the old OS. It's in stock for 2 months, and after 2 months, you give it to a new user, and we are already using the latest OS, and he still gets the old OS.
Right.
It would be great that even before the enrollment, we already can upgrade these devices.
Yeah.
It is possible, but very time consuming.
And do you find OS upgrades, especially on the Mac side of things, because we know all the press about, iPhones, that suddenly a model just becomes a brick with the latest iOS update. Is it similar with Mac OS? Is there a particular OS update that then you go, oh, hold on, the 2020 or 2019 models that we purchased, they've suddenly like going super slow and need to be refreshed. Does that happen on the Mac OS side of things?
Yeah, so I think in general rule, I think from Apple's, I'm not even sure if it's an official rule, but what I've seen discovered in the last couple of years working with Apple is that macOS hardware devices, after 7 years, they stop receiving macOS updates. So, for example, right now, I think the 2018 models is out of support for the
Right.
macOS Tahoe. That's 7 years ago, so it kind of makes sense. So, I mean, from an enterprise level, who's going to use a Mac device 7 years? Probably from an item perspective, you would like to.